The maitre d' barely spared a glance at Emily before shaking his head. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said with a practiced apology, "but there's no reservation under that name." Emily blinked, momentarily thrown off. "That can't be right. I was invited to dinner with my husband's family. They should already be here." He offered her a polite but immovable smile. "I've checked twice already. There's a reservation for 6 under the name Victoria Lancaster, but I'm afraid." A sharp, familiar voice sliced through his words. "Oh, Emily," Victoria's voice rang out, laced with gleeful amusement. "Did you really think I'd include you in tonight's dinner?" Emily turned slowly to face her mother-in-law, standing only a few feet away. As always, Victoria was immaculate, dressed in a custom-tailored suit, platinum blonde hair arranged in a style that screamed both wealth and control. Seated behind her, Emily's husband, Michael, sat stiff-backed, his gaze flitting nervously between his mother and his wife. His sisters, Valerie and Camille, whispered to each other, thinly veiled smirks tugging at their lips. Emily's stomach twisted, but she didn't show it. She wouldn't give Victoria that satisfaction. "I don't understand," Emily said, her voice measured calm. Victoria's smile widened. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, her tone dripping condescension. "I didn't think you'd actually show up. This is a family dinner, after all." She chuckled as if Emily had just told a cute joke. "A place like this? Well, it's a bit out of your league, don't you think? Maybe a budget bistro would be a better fit for you." Valerie snickered behind her wine glass. Camille kept her eyes trained on her plate, though the smirk remained. Michael, he sat there gripping his fork, so tightly his knuckles whitened, but he said nothing. Of course, he said nothing. Emily felt the flush of humiliation creep up her neck, the judgment in the air thick enough to choke on. Nearby diners were beginning to take notice, sneaking glances in their direction. She should have expected this. Victoria had spent years making it clear Emily wasn't good enough for her son. Emily hadn't come from old money like Victoria. She hadn't attended ivy-covered schools or grown up in gated estates. From the moment she and Michael got engaged, Victoria had gone out of her way to remind her, subtly at first, then more overtly, that she didn't belong. The barbed comments about Emily's simple taste, the invitations to family events that somehow never included Emily. The lavish gifts Victoria showered on Michael, while Emily received nothing but polite smiles. But tonight, Victoria had taken it to another level. She had arranged this dinner, one of the most prestigious, impossible-to-book restaurants in the city, ensuring Emily would arrive only to find she wasn't welcome. Left standing at the entrance like an unwelcome guest. Or worse, a stranger. She should have felt small, diminished. But something inside Emily clicked. She smiled, slowly, deliberately. And for the first time in years, she watched Victoria falter just for a moment. Without breaking eye contact, Emily turned back to the maitre d'. "Would you be so kind," she said, her voice smooth as silk, "as to ask the owner to come out?" Victoria gave a harsh laugh. "Oh, please. Do you honestly think the owner of this restaurant is going to bother coming out here, just because you asked?" Emily met Victoria's gaze evenly. "Yes," she replied simply, because she knew something Victoria didn't. And in a few moments, Victoria Lancaster was about to learn a lesson she wouldn't soon forget. The maitre d' hesitated, clearly unsure if he should indulge Emily's request. But before he could make up his mind, a deep voice cut through the tension. "Emily." She turned as Jonathan Reyes, the owner of the exclusive restaurant, stepped into view. A man in his early 50s, Jonathan embodied refined elegance, salt and pepper hair, a tailored suit that probably cost more than Emily's first car, and the effortless confidence of someone who knew exactly how much power he wielded. Victoria's eyes widened ever so slightly as she registered the warmth in Jonathan's expression when he looked at Emily. "Jonathan," Emily greeted him, her smile widening. "It's been too long." His gaze shifted briefly to Victoria, to Michael and the sisters, before settling back on Emily. "It has. What brings you here tonight?" Emily gestured to the table where her in-laws sat, their faces no longer amused. Apparently, she said lightly, I wasn't included in the reservation. A bit of an oversight, wouldn't you say? Jonathan's expression darkened briefly before he covered it with a courteous smile. That won't do. Victoria scoffed, crossing her arms. You can't just expect them to find her a seat, she said, her tone dripping disdain. This isn't some chain restaurant where you can just walk in. You're absolutely right, Jonathan agreed smoothly. We don't accept walk-ins. Not ever. Emily felt a pang of disappointment, but Jonathan wasn't finished. He turned toward the maitre d'. But Emily, he said, his voice steady, is not a walk-in. She's family. The entire table froze. Valerie's wine glass slipped slightly in her grasp. Camille's smirk vanished. And Michael, he gripped his silverware so hard it nearly bent. Victoria, however, wasn't one to back down. Family, she scoffed, her tone almost amused. I think you're mistaken. Emily is my son's wife. She has no connection to... Actually, Emily interrupted, her tone polite but firm. Jonathan and I go way back. Victoria's eyes narrowed. Ow! Emily leaned forward slightly, her voice just loud enough for the nearby tables to catch. Before I married Michael, I worked in fine dining. Jonathan was my mentor. A hush fell over the table. Jonathan nodded, his smile tight. She was one of my best students, he said. I trained her personally. Everything she knows about hospitality and fine dining, she learned from me. Victoria's jaw clenched. She had spent years believing Emily was beneath her, assuming she had no past worth mentioning. But this was something she hadn't expected, something that shifted the balance of power. Emily turned to the maitre d'. I assume Jonathan's word is enough to find me a seat. The maitre d' immediately straightened. Of course, MS. Emily, right away. Victoria's face turned a dangerous shade of red. This is ridiculous, she hissed. Emily gave her a pitying smile. What's ridiculous, she said, lowering her voice so only Victoria could hear, is that you thought you could humiliate me and get away with it. Victoria's nostrils flared. You're being dramatic. Emily leaned in, her tone light. I'm just enjoying dinner with my family. Isn't that what you wanted? Before Victoria could respond, Jonathan patted Emily's shoulder. I'll have a chef send over something special for you, he said warmly. Victoria nearly choked. Something special? On the house, of course. The waiter set an extra place at the table, right next to Michael. Émilie feignait surprise. Oh, look, plenty of room after all. Victoria clenched her fists under the tablecloth, but there was nothing she could do. Michael said nothing. Valerie and Camille avoided Emily's gaze. And Emily? She picked up her fork with practiced ease and took a bite of the delicate amuse-bouche placed in front of her. This is wonderful, she murmured, savoring both the food and the stunned silence. Victoria tried to recover, lifting her wine glass with false grace. I suppose it's natural for someone like you to have connections in hospitality. Emily arched a brow. Hospitality? Victoria waved a dismissive hand. You know, service work, waiting tables, kitchen staff. Not exactly the kind of career we're used to in this family. There it was. The real reason for tonight's stunt. Not just exclusion. Humiliation. Emily smiled faintly. You say that like it's a bad thing. Victoria's eyes flashed. It must have been quite the adjustment, marrying into a family like ours. Emily glanced at Michael. He still wouldn't look at her. That was when it clicked. This wasn't about Victoria. This was about Michael's silence. The same silence that had let moments like this go unchallenged time and again. She set her wine glass down carefully. Victoria, she said smoothly, do you know what the difference is between you and me? Victoria tilted her head, curious despite herself. Emily smiled. I worked for everything I have. A heavy silence descended over the table. Valerie stiffened. Camille pressed her lips together to hide a reaction. Michael still said nothing. Victoria scoffed. Are you implying I haven't worked for what I have? Emily didn't blink. I'm stating a fact. I didn't marry into wealth. I didn't inherit status. I built my career. And yet here we are, sitting at the same table, eating the same food, treated with the same respect. Victoria's fingers tightened around her napkin. She was losing control of the narrative, and she knew it. You should be careful about who you look down on, Emily added. You never know who might end up above you. Victoria's mask slipped for a fraction of a second. The poised matriarch suddenly looked afraid. But she rallied quickly. If you're so independent, she said slowly, why is my son paying for your lifestyle? Valerie gasped. Camille paled. Michael flinched. Emily placed her napkin on the table. What do you mean? Victoria leaned in, her voice low. My son is the reason you can afford your boutique job, isn't he? You play pretend at having a career. Emily studied her for a long moment. Then she laughed. Not a nervous giggle, but a full, genuine laugh. Victoria's smirk faltered. What's so funny? You think Michael supports me? Emily said, shaking her head. That's adorable. Valerie choked. Camille stared. Michael paled. Emily took a sip of wine. Half of Michael's investments? Funded with my money. His firm? I'm a majority shareholder. His projects? My strategies. Victoria's jaw dropped. That's not possible. Emily shrugged. Believe what you want. But I built this. He needed me far more than I ever needed him. The table went silent. Victoria's world was crumbling in real time. Michael opened his mouth. Emily, maybe we should. No, Michael, she said, cutting him off. You don't get to maybe we should this. Not anymore. Victoria turned to Michael, horrified at his spinelessness. He looked small. Emily stood, gathering her purse. I'm done here. You can't just, Victoria sputtered. Justin, Emily called to Jonathan. Thank you for the hospitality. He smiled. Always a pleasure. She looked back at Michael. You coming? He hesitated. She already knew the answer. He stayed seated, right where he had always been. Emily walked out without another word. As she stepped into the cool night air, she pulled out her phone. We're moving forward, she typed. Initiate the process tomorrow. The reply was instant. Attorney, understood. First draft of the divorce settlement by noon. Emily exhaled. Divorce. It didn't scare her. What scared her was how long she had ignored the truth. Nick and Victoria were about to learn exactly who they had underestimated. And Emily? Emily was done waiting for their approval.